Welcome back, everybody. It was an excellent first panel, and continuing that tradition, moving from the financial and the economics, we're going to talk with a bunch of lawyers. We're very lucky to have a very talented bunch of folks on the table here. Moving our way over, we're starting with Bob Quinn from AT&T, Mary Brown from Cisco, Bryan Tramont from Wilkinson, who will voted super lawyer, so I like to refer to him as mild-mannered, and Bryan Redl from the House Energy and Commerce Committee. I appreciate everybody being here. So we've heard a lot today about issue bundling. It does go on at the commission, and we see a lot of this deal making. And so what I want to start this panel off with, particularly given Bob's. Bob deals with it every day, and Bryan, who's both in the private sector and is chief of staff to Michael Powell. Let's start with you, Bryan. I mean, what is it like? I mean, give us a little bit of, when you're dealing in that position, take it from the chief of staff position, if you will, as opposed to your current position. What is it like when people walk in? I mean, tell us about that a little bit. How often do we see this? How much is that playing the FCC decision making?
So first of all, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the paper in particular. I think the issue bundling family of issues is very interesting, and it varies dramatically from commission to commission. And it comes in all shapes and sizes. You get issue bundling amongst the commissioners. So someone will come in and say, David might be familiar with some of these sort of swapping ideas from the Hill, but so Commissioner X will come in and say, I'll do X I'll do this and this docket if you'll do this other thing over here. And so that you see issue bundling in that context. You certainly see the issue bundling in the paper is the one that was within the commission's control, which I tried to limit as chief of staff, which is the going to the parties and trying to negotiate multiple dockets or multiple issues in one sitting. You also have the situation where parties bring issue bundling to the agency. So let's take N2Z. Like, I love some free spectrum, and in return, I'll do some free broadband over here. Or North Point is another good example. There are many of them. So issue bundling takes all kinds of shapes and sizes, and I think it takes real discipline on the part of the policymaker to resist the temptation to engage in it, because it is at times seen as a very efficient way to resolve multiple matters in a way that is beneficial to the regulator. But I do think, and the paper I think makes this point very compellingly, it has a very negative effect on precedent and the predictability of what the agency does. And once you open the door to that kind of deal making, it is not obvious what the boundaries are on what the agency does. So you saw examples where suddenly the repatriation of jobs to the US is part of a merger condition, clearly something beyond the scope of the FCC's authority. Yet once you start, I call it the piñata problem, you just bang on a transaction and see what goodies fall out. It's a real problem, and you invite people to bring ever bigger sticks to beat on the piñata, and Bob's been a piñata, so I'm eager to hear how this goes.
Bob.
See where it comes out. And it is not good for the institution. It is not good for reasoned decision making. It's certainly not good for precedent.
Bob, why don't you pick up on that? I mean, you're always over the FCC.
Yeah, and issue bundling, I totally agree with Bryan that it takes all kinds of forms. I think it's morphed into enforcement, and so I don't want to blend your two issues here on precedent, but I think the striking thing about this administration is it really has morphed into the enforcement area, where you have areas where there are no rules at all, or where the FCC has authority but hasn't enacted rules, and they are using enforcement as a mechanism to either obtain consent decrees or NALs that they then use in place of actually doing a rulemaking. They use the consent decrees to say, well, this is the new rule, and I think that's an area that I didn't notice it very much in the past. It's really prevalent today.
Well, expand on that a little bit. I mean, give the example. I mean, you guys got hit with a $100 million fine, like Dr. Evil. $100 million, for doing something that has been clearly, at least from your, I'm sure, interpretation, you were complying with the law for the last 7 years almost, or however many years.
Yeah, I mean, the throttling, we called it a maximum bit rate program. The generic term that everybody uses is throttling. I mean, you know, we had disclosed what we were doing in terms of our open internet rule transparency requirements that emanated from the 2010 order. You know, we've been disclosing that practice for 3 years, and 3 years later, we walk into the agency in 2014, and you know, first the FTC comes after it, then the FCC starts asking questions only after the FTC complaint got filed, by the way. And when we raised the issue of why now, 3 years later, a practice that everyone in the industry is doing, why now? And the answer was, well, we weren't here back then. You know, we're the new guys in town, so we can, you know, we don't have to be bound by the fact that precedent. So I think we've raised a very strong defense on that. But, you know, that got circulated at the commission a year ago. So even if this is the problem with, instead of doing rules, you know, if the FCC wants to decide that the throttling practices that are going on in the industry on, by the way, on grandfathered plans, right? So they're all grandfathered. There are other carriers that are offering the plans still today, but for us and for Verizon, I believe the unlimited plans have been grandfathered. If you want to change your approach, the appropriate way, I think, for government to do it is to do it in the notice and comment rulemaking, establish a rule. If we think that the rule is inconsistent with the law, we'll take it to court, and we'll challenge it. But we'll have a clear set of rules that everybody has to play by. What we've got right now is we've got a world in which we've got a $100 million NAL against us, we've got an FTC complaint against us, and I'm going to challenge anybody to look at the disclosures that went on prior to our complaint being announced, the FTC complaint or even the FCC complaint, and say that everybody's disclosures were practically identical. As a matter of fact, when we did our open internet transparency report, the FCC at the time was directing other carriers to look at what we had done as kind of the model of the industry. And so the idea that 3 years later we're just going to change the rules and we're going to do it in an enforcement action. We're not going to do it via a rulemaking. I think it impacts the competitiveness of the industry, because here we are a year later. From the FCC action, there's been no other actions. You know, they hint that there's going to be more actions coming down the pike, but, you know, a year later, there's nothing. And by the way, they have a year statute of limitations, so anybody who changed their policies a year ago in response to our complaint, there'll never be an enforcement action against them. So I don't know. I think it's a bad way to run the railroad, if you will. I've been pretty vocal about that. I've been pretty upfront with the staff. I don't think that's the appropriate way to do it. And I'm going to tell you, this isn't limited to this area. It's not just throttling. They did this in 222A for 20 years. We've had CP&I rules. And I will grant you that in 222A, there is a term in there called customer proprietary information. For 20 years, the agency has treated that as the identical, synonymous with CP&I. And so the CP&I rules, that was the defined term, and that's what the rules were about. In an enforcement action, they take a small carrier, they tell this carrier they're going to fine them $10 million unless they do a consent decree. They take the NAL, and then when they get into it, they negotiate out of it. But we still don't have CPI rules at the commission, and everybody's kind of left scratching their head. Yesterday, they just hired Jonathan Mayer on privacy enforcement, even though they've forborne for the time being from privacy rules on broadband. Did they hire him in the group that's going to establish privacy rules? No. Where did they hire him? Enforcement. I don't get it. I just don't get it. It's not the way you're supposed to run the government.
Mary, let me ask you.
And I haven't even talked, by the way, about merger conditions. I have not even talked about the pinata.
I want to get back to the pinata.
We have a large stick you can beat Bob with, and candy will come flowing forth. But let me ask you, go into that. I mean, it's interesting. The day the open internet order came out, I got a phone call from a reporter. It was very astute. His question was, and this goes to the process point. You know, in talking a little bit about Bob said, I mean, we want, I said, industry-wide, and even just as the principle of major issues of policy, we want the commission to vote. But by effectively shoving everything down to the Enforcement Bureau, you're really under the direct supervision of the chairman. I mean, and don't you think that's a way of sort of getting around raises some good government issues?
Well, it raises some significant good government issues in that the Enforcement Division is acting on a specific complaint, and the only parties to the enforcement action are the person making the complaint and the person who's being complained about. So over the past year, one of the things, from the equipment manufacturer's side that we've been concerned about is the FCC took some action against a hotel that used a security technology called de-authentication, for you geeks in the audience, to disable your Wi-Fi. When you walked into their hotel, your personal hotspot on your smartphone was disabled, and you were forced to use the hotel Wi-Fi as your Wi-Fi for a fee. Thank you very much. And I think we can all agree that's a bad practice, and the hotel should not have done that. But it came up in the context of an enforcement action. So the people who actually knew about this practice, like Cisco, who actually understood how de-authentication is part of the IEEE standards around Wi-Fi, who understood how it's used in the context of security, who understood how NIST basically mandates it for federal installations, or how the financial and banking community uses it, we weren't part of the conversation, right? So they come out with this order, and it is basically declares de-authentication illegal, which, if you understand the IEEE standards, you've now declared Wi-Fi to be illegal. You have declared Wi-Fi to be illegal because when you walk out of the room where your Wi-Fi connection is, de-authentication is how the network shuts down with respect to your client. It's part of the fabric of Wi-Fi. But they declared the whole thing to be illegal, and only last month, in a subsequent enforcement action, did the FCC finally say, oh, well, we get that. We're not declaring that to be illegal, right? We're just declaring this bad practice that the hotels are doing to be illegal. So it's not a good context in which to make policy. You need to open it up to other players. And there seems to be this notion that enforcement can just ride in and get a headline, which is great. And I'm thrilled that they shook their finger at the hotel industry for what was happening there. But it doesn't lead to good policymaking.
Just one second on this. I do think what is tempting, of course, is you're sitting in the Enforcement Bureau and you see the hotel do something, you hear about the hotel doing something bad and you want to do something.
Right.
It's very tempting to jump in and try to do something. But we have processes for a reason. And at the end of the day, going through rulemaking and doing the hard work and drawing the lines is the way the government is supposed to function. And there is a reason, right? It has, you make better decisions, you give due process to all the parties involved, you are upheld in court. There are lots of reasons to do the harder work, to do the rulemaking, to get it done. And at the end of the day, it's not going to be faster because you're going to end up with all this toing and froing. And Mary just referenced one example about what are the boundaries. And you've got the same issue on the privacy side of things. And so at the end of the day, it is better to exercise the regulatory restraint and to go through the hard work of deciding what the rules are so that everybody can adhere to them.
If only somebody cared about process reform.
Yeah, I don't know.
So you guys have hit on a number of things that my bosses have been concerned about for the last 5 years since the Republicans took the majority back in the House. To touch on the merger condition issue that's come up, my bosses have been very clear where they stand on merger conditions. They should be narrowly tailored. They should be within the FCC's jurisdiction. They should be for transaction-specific harms. How you look at a video merger and somehow decide that you need to put a broadband condition on the merger between two video companies is beyond sort of where we believe the FCC should be going. We have a lot of concerns with where the FCC goes in terms of trying to expand its jurisdiction through the use of the merger condition process. And that plays right into what Quinn was talking about in terms of enforcement. And we've watched the Enforcement Bureau get increasingly more aggressive in both trying to garner headlines in big numbers and also in terms of trying to expand the FCC's jurisdiction without going through proper process. This ultimately led my bosses to send a letter to GAO asking them to start investigating the Enforcement Bureau's management practices. We have been looking at this for 5 years. We've had extensive back and forth for the last 5 years with the FCC, and unfortunately, as it turns out, it seems as though the Enforcement Bureau's only metric for success is what's the dollar figure we put out there in terms of NALs. And somebody in the audience who shall remain nameless did a nice piece on this recently when it comes to the journalism aspect of it, but the reality is we've got an Enforcement Bureau that's looking for headlines and not looking to try and take the policies that the Commission has voted on and enforce them in a way that is transparent and consistent across the board. Coming back to sort of the bigger picture here, which was the issue bundling question, I don't think issue bundling in itself is a bad practice, right? As you pointed out, it's something that happens on Capitol Hill all the time, and although the FCC hates when we compare their process to the legislative process, there are some parallels. But like any tool, it depends on how you use it. And one of the ways that issue bundling has become problematic is in the absence of what has traditionally been available information. And this is something that has been really a problem for the minority commissioners of the FCC, which is understanding what's actually going on in the commission. We heard in our last oversight hearing that Commissioner Pai has been asking for the Enforcement Bureau's active proceedings for the last 6 months, and they've outright stonewalled them and told them you don't get to know what the commission for which you're a commissioner is working on. That really troubles my bosses and the other members of the subcommittee. And it's something we're really trying to find a way to push the FCC to go back to sort of the way things used to be, which is a more collegial body. We see this across the US government. There are other independent agencies that are capable of disagreeing collegially. We'd like the FCC to get back to that.
Well, go ahead, Mary.
I just want to get back to the issue bundling. I'm going to go a little bit further, which I think some of it is inevitable. And I say this because a long time ago I worked for a big carrier, and my job was to worry about mergers. And the FCC's practices on this can inflame issue bundling or make it more rational. But essentially what happens in a merger situation is the CEO and the CFO have decided that there's going to be a merger. And then they call the government affairs person in and say, and what do you think? You think we can get it past the DOJ and the FCC and CFIUS if that's involved? And of course the government affairs says, well, we can do this and that and the other thing. We can work on it, and I'm going to need a big budget to do it.
You should see the look on Bob's face. He's like, I've been in that call, man.
Right, I've been on that call many times, right? And we're all a little bit guilty in the private sector when we do these mergers, because the higher the stakes, the higher the HHI, the more concern that the merger will appear to be questionable, the more the lawyers want to pile the goodies out there. Because on day one, when that merger is announced and those talking points go out to the Hill and the FCC and the Department of Justice and influencers in Washington, right? People are really pushing for a favorable spin on that merger. So we do it a little bit to ourselves, and I think that needs to be acknowledged.
I'll agree with that to an extent. And the extent that I'll agree with it to is if I wasn't dealing with the public interest standard at the FCC and I was only dealing with the antitrust laws at the DOJ, that list would look a lot different.
Yeah.
And it would look different because the only goodies that I'd be throwing out there would be what is DOJ going to object to in this merger, and it's going to be a defined set. And those are the issues that we would try to address. When you're dealing with the public interest standard, it's the waterfront.
Well,
like a low-income broadband offer on a DirecTV universe.
All right, go ahead, Brian.
I'll be quick, I promise. And the reason it works better at DOJ is that DOJ is put to their paces in front of a judge at the end of the day if they don't do it. So my view is that, and it's for your reform effort, if the FCC is going to deny a merger after 18 months, the first answer is not to send it to an ALJ, which they are legally obligated to do today. If you've spent 18 months looking at a deal, then let them go to court. Because either one way or the other, going to go to court, and you should be able to appeal if you take it with conditions.
But listen, I'm going to give you a qualifier on that. We got sued by the DOJ, and we never made it to court. And why didn't we make it to court? Because they tag-teamed us, and the FCC basically decided that they were going to invoke the ALJ process on us to deny us our day in court.
Exactly. But if you take away the ALJ process, then they have to go to court. And I think you should take away the ALJ process for mergers. It should not be an obligation in order for them to deny a merger. They have to go to an ALJ unless you're going to put every deal in front of an ALJ, which nobody wants to do. So I think you have to take it away, and you have to let people get to court on grants with conditions or denials, and let them go to court and let them prove it.
I can tell you that before I became an FCC lawyer, I was an electric utility lawyer, and we said everything for merger hearing and for an ALJ. And there was actually a trial, so none of the shenanigans. And so one of my pet peeves, ever since I've been a junior lawyer, was the law in the public interest. And I published a paper about 5 years ago. And what's aggravating to me is that there's actually a ton of law on how to define the public interest. The point is that the FCC chooses the law. And that brings me up to your boss's point. It's really sad that your boss had to put in a piece of legislation that says you can only, impose a condition related to a merger-specific harm, when that is what the case law for 90 years has been. And here's what's interesting, though. Going to your DirecTV merger, there's not a voluntary merger commitment in the whole order. Everything is a mandated condition. So now we've even gotten around that whole issue of having a merger-related commission. So tell me how a merger-related commission is provide a $10 a month broadband commitment, or my favorite, building out to $12.5 million homes, which I also showed how Tom Wheeler then, I said in our paper, it said 4 years from now they'll have a commitment saying investment won't go down after 4 years after Title II, but Tom Wheeler couldn't wait and testified last week. See, look, investment's gone up 40%. So how do you get around that? I mean, we're still back to the same problem of the lack of respect of law at the commission.
Well, you don't get around it. I mean,
Yeah.
you ask me how to get around it. I'm the poster child for you don't get around it. I'm the piñata, remember?
But to quote your paper, which I love this line, difficulty is no excuse for complacency.
Yes.
And so, we have to figure out ways to cabin the authority, and David's bill goes a long way towards getting some of that done, but it does require that the clear rules of the road are set at the beginning of a chairmanship, because unfortunately, I think every chairman approaches these issues somewhat differently, and you have different degrees of openness to the atomization of these issues as opposed to the bundling.
But what our paper shows is that, and George Binn's point is that with the rise of issue bundling, the role of legal precedent goes down, because everything is a deal, so what I did yesterday means nothing to what the deal is going to do now. And so once the role of law and the respect of the rule of law goes down, that trickles in. By way of example, and I've done several papers on it this year, you look at what happened in the AWS-3 auction. I mean, this is how the FCC decides to run an auction. Go ahead and file a short form. Tell us everything you're going to do. Okay, go ahead and bid. You know this is the chart, this is the dish deal. The FCC knew, George did an economic analysis, that within a week that the bidding credits were up to $3 billion. You could have called off the auction then. No, you then realize that Charlie Ergen, or his proxies, wasn't the political person. The FCC says, well, they knew they were caught in a political pickle, not a legal pickle. And so what they said was, well, Dish did nothing wrong. They basically hired very bad lawyers who misunderstood the rules. But to the extent that his lawyers didn't understand the rules and then relied on precedent, in a footnote, they disavowed the precedent. So if we're at that point now, where the FCC, the role of precedent, I dismiss it in a footnote, how do you then have any form of regulatory credibility? That's just one example. You could look at the open internet order. You could look at the Tennessee preemption case, where people, to use George's line, are just making crap up. What do you do about that? That's the problem.
I'll tell you from a legislative perspective, my boss brought this up at the last service hearing in his opening statement. Chairman Walden said, it's time for Congress to start narrowing the law.
Right.
These broad grants of jurisdiction to independent agencies need to stop. If they can't take what's given to them by the legislature and apply it in a way that is consistent with the policy dictated by the legislature, then the legislature should take it away. And that's where we've been trying to get to. We've been looking at how to move process in a way that is predictable. I mean, we can all talk till we're blue in the face about wanting to see more transparency and more this. The reality is what we all want is predictability. We want the FCC, when presented with the same set of facts, to rule the same way twice, and that simply isn't the case right now. They find a way to distinguish it that may make no sense whatsoever, usually based around defining a market in a way that makes their case, not the actual real-world case. And then they define a new precedent and they move forward in the way they wanted from the beginning anyway. We've all been on the receiving, anybody who's been in private practice has been on the receiving end of the FCC defining the market in a way that makes no sense whatsoever unless you had a defined outcome from the start. And so, I think from my boss's perspective, that's what we have to look at. Where have we granted the FCC, and frankly other independent agencies for that matter, so much authority that it's time to look and say, are they really doing this consistent with what Congress has asked them?
And what I find most disconcerting about it is it's one thing, there are political changes, right? There's a different administration, the FCC reflects the administration, there's going to be different approaches to spectrum caps and a host of other issues that you see when the political tides change. And that's what politics is all about, and I have no objection to that. What I do have concerns about is you switch 10 years after the fact to how broadband is classified, and it is a foundational element to the entire sector. So it's one thing to make, to change around the margins economic legislation or economic regulation because the politics change. To me, it is a completely different exercise to fundamentally shift the underpinnings of the entire regulatory regime that is a driver of our economy, that is, the investment stars of our country. They're not just piñatas, they're also the investment stars of our country. And that is a much more troubling evolution in the FCC's approach to things. And I think that is truly damaging because you do need to have a foundational level of predictability about what 222 means, about how broadband is classified. And changing that 10 years on and later is problematic.
Yeah, Mary, you're in the vendor community. What are you seeing from that perspective? This lack of predictability is the great word to use, Bryan. We talked about. What are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, I think the prior panel discussed this as well. You want predictability, right? And predictability means that carriers will know what they need to do in terms of investment. And while there are other factors, it's not just regulatory predictability, there's consumer demand, consumer willingness to pay, the state of competition, life cycles, and so on that influence what a carrier is doing in terms of investment. Lack of predictability is one of those issues that goes into the mix of how a network is going to be further enhanced or changed out or deployed. And right now we are at a pivotal moment, really. We have mobile demand going up geometrically. We have the dawn of the Internet of Everything and the Internet of Things, where we've got tremendous numbers of devices, new business cases for the carriers, right? We need networks that can distinguish between types of traffic so that the traffic for voice and video gets there first so we can have a good consumer experience, right? We need to be investing in these kinds of technologies. And at this moment, now we have a lot of uncertainty around the decision and the ultimate appeal, which hopefully will be resolved soon by the court. But it is a concern.
If you'll indulge me in an anecdote for a minute. So I recently took a meeting with some regulators from another country. And I think this bears on what we're talking about in terms of predictability. And they asked, basically, I said, we looked at your background. You've been working for the legislature for 5 years. Before that, you worked for the wireless industry. So, can you explain a little bit about how your country does auctions and why things have gone so well? And what this whole conversation boiled down to was they were flabbergasted by the idea of a renewal expectancy. Completely shocked by the idea of a renewal expectancy and couldn't understand why wouldn't you re-auction the asset every 10 years? Because no one would invest $1.4 trillion in 20 years in broadband networks if they knew they had to go buy the asset back again and that investment might be useless. It's a strange analogy to make, but it works. As we're looking across the board at all these companies that have to go mother may I the FCC, and we're seeing that with T-Mobile right now. They put out there binge on with the idea of, well, let's hope that our analysis is correct, that this isn't a problem for net neutrality. And it seems as though in the mother may I process that it looks like the FCC has said yes, you may, for now. And so you have to ask yourself, why would you take that risk? Thank goodness somebody is doing it like T-Mobile, putting out pro-consumer plans like that, even knowing the risk at the FCC. And this is the sort of predictability problem we have.
And it's particularly important for auctions to go back to your Dish point, which is that when you're participating and you're putting tens of billions of dollars on the line, you want to know what the rules are going in. And I don't think anybody goes into an auction trying to disobey the rules. And so I think the importance of clarity around auctions in particular, I think it's critical to the success of those auctions going forward. you can agree or disagree whether there should be a DE program or not and all those sorts of things, but it's hard to argue with the fact that you should know how you're supposed to structure it if you're going to do it.
I mean, again, it's the role of precedent, and that's what I'm sort of going to. It's this erosion. Putting aside the issue, but it is just, I just constantly see this just, the rule of law doesn't matter. And and it goes to the predictability point. I mean, again, I gave a couple of examples. Look at the open internet order. I mean, just as the phrase I use in that order, wrote an op-ed, I said, you see more legal gymnastics in that order than you do in the Cirque du Soleil show on the Vegas Strip. I mean, I've never seen anything like it, once you get past the reclassification. So, again, what do you do? We're all lawyers on this panel. How do you do your business? I mean, Bob, you must get calls from the business people all the time going, what do you mean I can't do this? I mean, how are those internal discussions when
We've had, since the open internet order came out, we had weekly calls with the business units and literally like 15 lawyers, all trying to figure out whether or not stuff that we had invested in and worked on was going to be a violation of the order. And we had to shelve a bunch of stuff because we gotta wait and see. We would never come out with anything to like binge on, I don't believe, because we would have. We believe we would have had a different result.
Well, you guys could barely get your Wi-Fi calling through. So
Wi-Fi calling, that's another great example. At least in the area of the open internet order, when they're doing things in a rulemaking and doing policies, we have appeals, and we can take them to appeals. When you're doing things in voluntary merger commitments, there's no appeal, because you're agreeing to this stuff, and your choice is either not consummate the merger or accept what the game plan is. And by the way, you get mergers between other parties where you have no right to challenge that merger once they've agreed to those commitments. And I think the merger area has always been a problem. I think you can reform that. I think the other area that has become a growing problem is the area of enforcement, because what you end up with is rules that come out of consent decrees, as Mary pointed out, that nobody has any input into. And from Mary's, let's just take the de-authentication, right? If the FCC had decided that what we're going to do is we are worried about the development of Wi-Fi, we're going to open up a rulemaking or, God forbid, an NOI, and actually try to understand the problem and let different parts of the industry, the technology companies and other people come in and just inform the debate, and then go to a rulemaking procedure, we can have a debate as to whether or not de-authentication comports with the 333A interference standard. I mean, we can have a debate about that. At the end of the day, we'll have a rule. If somebody feels like the rule's wrong, the FCC overstepped its bounds, then they can take that to court. I think the more troubling areas are the areas that we're in now in enforcement and in mergers where there is no appeal. And there is no court to kind of fall back on. At least, you can say what you will about the open internet order, and obviously we've said bundles about the open internet order. And, at the end of the day, the only opinion that's going to matter is the one that comes out after Friday's oral argument and then after it gets done at the Supreme Court, because I don't care who wins or loses, I think that's going to go to the Supreme Court. And those are the only opinions that will matter as to whether the FCC was right or wrong in doing the rules. But at least we'll get finality through that process, what we don't have when it's done in these other areas. And I think they can be enforced as well. I think we can reform the process around enforcement. I think we can reform the process around mergers. At least that way we'll get a final answer at the end of the day. And we'll have input into it.
Go ahead.
So when I was at the FCC 100 years ago, 150 years ago, there were two categories of employees.
He's only 80 years old.
I went to whenever I needed to be enlightened and to seek truth and to get past all the verbiage and the positioning. One was the engineering staff, right? You could go to the engineering staff and you would get engineering ground truth. And the other was your favorite economist, usually assigned to your division, but as Tim pointed out, not in a division of their own. And in the FCC structure itself, we have an Office of Engineering and Technology, which is a gem of the FCC. And they end up, by the way, with all the tough interference issues, right? Whenever somebody is alleging a very difficult interference issue, guess who gets to decide that, right? It gets put in the Office of Engineering and Technology. We don't have a counterpart, and I like what Tim had to say on the earlier panel. We don't have a counterpart for economists, right? The economists are all reporting up through lawyers, right? And I think that is genuinely a problem. I think there should be an office of economics within the agency that can serve as a counterweight on some of this stuff.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, my bosses have been very clear. They think the FCC should be adhering to a cost-benefit analysis, along with the rest of the federal government that that's under an executive order to do so. We did some work during the last oversight hearing to point out how ridiculous some of the standards are. As we looked, and the FCC assumes, essentially a cost of $1 an hour to comply with some of its rules.
That was a good one.
They don't pass the laugh test, and this isn't. We've been seeing this consistent. This isn't just this FCC. You may recall under Chairman Martin, we had the backup power rules for cell sites that fell under a similarly ridiculous analysis when it came to the amount of time that would be necessary and money to comply. And so a cost-benefit analysis and some more heavy lifting from economists at the FCC would certainly be a welcome addition as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, and let's just say, from the FCC staff's perspective, this stuff is really tough. I mean, you put a draft order up on the floor, and now you've got 5 very well-intentioned, opinionated people who start pulling it in different directions. And very often you end up with, well, I want both, right? We have to do this and we have to do this, that are entirely the opposite. And you have to do your best as a staffer to enable whatever the chairman wants to get the majority vote, right? It's not easy. I mean, we can sit up here and be glib about some of the decision making and how it falls short, but it's not an easy process. And we need to inform the discipline of economics and engineering needs to be informed at that internal debate level.
And not only is it not an easy process, it's one that's completely dominated by the chairman. We had the 5 commissioners up in our last oversight hearing and asked them point blank about whether or not they should be doing cost-benefit analyses. We had 3 yeses, 1 I agree in principle, and 1 I'll get back to you. And the I'll get back to you was the chairman. So, where you would have a 4-1 vote to do it, unfortunately when the 1 is the chairman, it's not going to see the light of day.
Well, I'll give you a great example. I mean, because I've been harping on this for a long time too. We're going to file comments apparently in January, although I don't know how that could possibly be, given the fact that the commission keeps telling us that they've got one major CLEX special access data that is not available to us yet in the record, and was supposed to be available to us about a month ago and is still not available. So my guess is that comment date will have to get kicked, but who knows. But there's a great example. I mean, you've got a proceeding that's been going on for 10 years. It took 1 year to collect the data. We submitted it to the commission over a year ago. As I said before, we still don't have access to all of the data. We're going to have a proceeding on this. And the 98, 99% of the circuits that we're talking about are DS1 circuits that are in decline at the rate of about 20% a year. By the time we finish this proceeding, this will be the long distance market, right? And it makes absolutely no sense. And if anybody were to look at the cost that's been incurred by the industry to collect this data, submit this data, and now go analyze this data and fight about this data, and then let's just say the FCC declares that we need to re-regulate in this area. They've deregulated in 250 MSAs across the country, so we're going to have to go back on 250 MSAs and declare what the rates are going to be. I guarantee you, if you ever did any kind of cost-benefit analysis, there is no benefit. There's enormous cost to be derived here, and what the focus of the agency should be on is moving everybody over to IP and Ethernet services. And that's what we ought to be focused on. Instead, we're spending money on this proceeding, and it's a travesty.
I have to jump on that. So, Bob, I can't remember when you wrote it. Maybe 5 years ago, you wrote a blog that exactly predicted this process, I think, and foretold exactly that it was going to take forever, that it didn't make any sense to be doing this now. There's a huge waste of time. And so first of all, he's not just saying that today. He's been saying that for years, and it's absolutely true. So, but secondly, and perhaps most importantly, what's amazing to me about this debate is that the FCC's policies actually worked. We have extraordinary investment in higher capacity bandwidth from a variety of providers on the cable side and on the Spiwak side. I mean, the policies that were designed by the Knauer administration to facilitate additional people entering the market and to do great things when it comes to backhaul and competition have actually worked, and yet somehow that's what they've decided to revisit.
And we've come full circle to what I was talking about earlier, market definition.
Yeah,
So we're looking
that's
at
a great
highlights,
example.
DS1s and DS3s, but we've ignored Ethernet.
Yeah.
No, but by the way, when you look at the market share on DS1 and DS3, DS1 and DS3 are twisted pair technologies, right? So if you want to look at DS1s and DS3s, we're still going to have the bulk of it, even though the market is going completely south, because nobody deploys it. They deploy fiber and they deploy IP-based services, but our market definitions, once again, are so stilted that I guarantee you, they'll declare, oh, you have really high market share in DS1s. Duh.
Yeah,
There's no CLECs doing DS1s. The cable companies aren't doing DS1s. They're all doing IP-based technology.
AT&T dominates the horse and buggy market.
Yeah.
That's basically what that is. When everyone else is in a car or in a plane.
It's important to some, and then we must keep it alive. Switching gears slightly, and just going back to this overall theme, and stuff, comment you raised earlier, David. I mean, what is the mood on Capitol Hill? Because, you know, all of our research is indicating, you hear us talk about, I mean, it's almost that Congress is losing control of the regulators. And I would think that whether or not you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, you know, the thing that Congress is always big about is maintaining its own turf. You know, that an independent agency is a creature of Congress. It's not a creature of the executive branch. I mean, that's why they created the Federal Trade Commission. That is an alternative to the executive branch of the DOJ. I mean, what is the mood on the Hill? I mean, just in terms of, are they seeing this sort of vast expansion? Because, you know, you have an intent of what the law is supposed to be, and then you just have, it's gone so far beyond.
So expansion is in the eye of the beholder, right? If you're getting what you want out of an agency that is expanding beyond its jurisdiction, then you're happy about that. Capitol Hill, and if it's showing restraint in an area you want them to show restraint, then you're happy about the agency in that respect. But I think the most telling thing about the mood on Capitol Hill is that we're going to continue to do oversight, and we're going to continue to press. We've had a lot of oversight hearings. And frankly, when we have oversight hearings, they bear fruit. They may not bear all the fruit people want. Not everyone's getting what they want, but the FCC comes up and is responsive. I think you can see that most recently, there was a lot of concern bipartisanly at our hearing about the chairman's plan to move forward on the regulation of over-the-top video. And what came out at the hearing is that proceeding is on hold. I'm going back to the drawing board. Where there was bipartisan concern that it was going in the wrong direction, there was a response by the FCC that was appropriate. If both parties in Congress think this is a bad move, I should probably reconsider. And so where we have bipartisan agreement, which, you know, despite the fact that the partisan differences get a lot of play publicly, there's more agreement bipartisanly in communications policy than disagreement. If you set aside the net neutrality fight, you know, for the last year, pretty much everything else we've done in the committee has been bipartisan. Last Congress we moved, I want to say, and I'm going to get the number wrong, I want to say there were 11 unanimous bipartisan bills moved on suspension out of our subcommittee.
For example?
FCC process reform, FCC consolidated reporting, Stellar twice went through the floor, and we can do this all day. There were a ton of bills that made it through the House unanimously because we were willing to sit down and do the hard work to meet in the middle and find agreement. And where that happens, or even where we just start in the same place, on over the top, it seems that everyone started in the same place, that they had concerns. I think the FCC has been responsive. But ultimately this boils down to whether or not you can get the chairman of the FCC to listen to you because of the way the FCC's rules are structured. If the chairman has decided to move forward with something in an agency where it's a 3-2 majority and the 3 are all willing to vote with the chairman, it's going to happen, and vice versa. If the chairman has dug his heels in and said it's not going to happen, like we're seeing on cost-benefit analysis, it's not going to happen. And so while that structure has worked, it assumes a collegiality that has eroded in the last couple of years. And you know, it's gotten to the point now where you can't even get information shared between the groups, where edits are withheld until the last minute on commission level items, so that, you know, the minority commissioners don't have time to review the item before the vote. In some cases, the document is handed to the commissioners on the dais when they're expected to vote for it. You know, this isn't an agency that's working correctly. And as long as there's going to continue those kind of process fouls, we can argue about the policy all day long. And that's what Congress is for. We're supposed to argue about the policy and find ways to move forward on policy that makes the majority of the American public prosper. But the process has to work regardless of the policy outcome, and that's really our biggest concern, is bringing them in and making sure they adhere to a decent process.
All right, well, let's take that a step farther. I mean, so we've identified all these problems, and we're all lawyers in the panel. So the question is, what can you do about it? I mean, years ago, I had a friend of mine. He was the 9th employee of MCI, one of the founders of Sprint. He was the consummate telephone guy I ever met. He had a great line. He said, Larry, you understand, this is an easy business. So what is that business? He goes, if you know the rules, you can make money, right? And so the point is like, oh my God, there's arbitraging of FCC rules. That's what lawyers do. I'm still upset that Bob lost over VoIP in the middle 10 years ago. Still one of my all-time favorite cases. The VoIP in the middle. Come on, that's funny. We have long memories since the 50s. So the question is, what do we do? And you have process reform, but again, you have crafty lawyers and doing it. So I've been giving some thought about this. I was at TPRC and I ran into Jonathan Cave, who's an American. He lives in Britain, and he's on this thing called, I wrote this down, the Regulatory Policy Committee. It's interesting. It's their version of OIRA, but it's not in the executive branch. It's independent. And what's interesting there, he said, we do a cost-benefit analysis, and if we find, if OIRA never finds a violation of the cost-benefit analysis the administration wants, it's just, it's just never going to happen. But they do it independent, and they say, and they've gone out with rules that say, well, look, this doesn't match the cost-benefit. This is nakedly political. So if you want to go out with it, just say it's political and be done with it. It's something like that helpful. I mean, that's only obviously rulemaking is not adjudication, but something like that.
Right, I'll find myself awkwardly supporting the FCC in that I support the American system. I mean, the reason they have the RPC in England is because Ofcom is basically a ministerial position.
Right.
And so, I mean, if we had a Secretary of Communications instead of an FCC, then yeah, you want that. But that's the role that a properly functioning FCC should be embodying. A properly functioning FCC should have that kind of debate. It should be exposed. It should be addressed. It should be addressed in the final text of a document that's put out for people to criticize before it's published in the Federal Register and a done deal. These are the kinds of things that, you shouldn't have to create a new body for. We have one that, when it's working right, does all these things.
This is the academic portion of the program. So we're floating ideas. All right, here's another idea. I'd like to float this out. I'm sure this will cause Bryan and Bob a heart attack. What about severely curtailing the ex parte rules? I mean, I can tell you that when I was a staff attorney at FERC, prior to my company, okay, I never would have met anybody because they were like, you are not to talk with a single person.
Is that why you left FERC?
Actually, the reason why I left FERC, believe it or not, was the FCC was looking for people with a rate-making background to implement the 1992 Cable Act. So as I like to joke, I'm not proud of my rate-making background, but I have one. But I have not looked back. But the point is like you have a massive ex parte problem. I mean, I remember the first day I was at the FCC. There was Dick Wiley walking down the halls, and I remember we're working on a case, and like, AT&T's going to have a briefing over their offices. I'm like, you mean as a staff attorney, I can walk over and they're going to buy me lunch at their offices? Oh yeah, it's fine. I mean, does that help? I mean, the point is like if you control the ex partes, you have less. There's less bargaining because it seems to be the way the system works now is. Again, going back to my FERC days, FERC had meetings every other Wednesday, and I typically had 2 orders on each meeting. This is not rocket science. But now the way it works at the FCC is, oh my God, we set the comment proceeding, and then we lobby for a year. We can't make up our mind, we do this, we do that, and finally at the last minute we get up sunshine, hurry. I mean, does that help curtail things or not?
I personally think the ex parte process is important in the sense that it helps inform the debate on the consequences of the proposed actions that are going on. Because, remember, Larry, you go over to that FCC, it's a room full of lawyers. It's
right.
not a room full of engineers or economists. You may get an economist or an engineer in the meeting. And, particularly on the internet, I mean, I'm going to tell you, the open internet proceeding was just an eye-opener on so many different levels. But we went over, Tom Powers at CTIA now, who's over at the White House. And it became apparent during the course of that proceeding that the White House was worried about Netflix. Now, they'll say that they weren't, but they were. They wanted to understand the Netflix issue, which made us go in there and sit down with a bunch of people to talk about peering. Now, Power's going to freak out when I say this, but we spent literally several meetings of multiple hours over there explaining how peering, transiting, how the interrelationship between all of these services and basically the building blocks of how the internet worked. And this is the part where Tom's going to be unhappy. But he said to me after we'd done those meetings, he said, this is a really complex issue. He said, I've been practicing telecom law for 30 years. I had no real conception of how all this stuff knit together and how it fit. And now I understand it a lot better. And these meetings were really helpful for us to kind of formulate an administrative position in this area. Now, you know, ultimately Obama did a video, and I don't know that those.
But there was
anything good,
branch that wasn't the agency.
But it wasn't the agency. But we had the same meetings at the agency, okay, Larry, and they didn't understand the fundamentals of how peering worked. Now, I could take part responsibility because when we were at AT&T Corp, we wouldn't talk to anybody at the FCC about peering. They didn't regulate it. We didn't want them to know about it because we figured if they knew about it, they'll come up with an excuse to regulate it. Which 20 years later they did.
And they did.
And they did.
How convenient.
But once they were in the area of going down this road and saying, hey, we're going to regulate internet interconnection for the first time, then we had to explain to them, well, you don't understand the consequences and understand how this industry works. And I fear that if you did this in a vacuum with no ex partes, what you'd end up with is a very uninformed process. Now, at the end of the day, people make policy judgments and ignore some arguments and say, okay, we're going to go with this argument over here, even when there's no real analysis behind it. That happens, but that's a policy decision. At least the ex parte process ends up with a result where you have the opportunity to say, look, there's going to be a whole bunch of bad consequences if you go and do this. Understand what's really going on. And I thought that that was an important part. The way it works, it's an important part today.
So I agree with Bob. I actually think the ex parte process is very important, and it does help refine the debate, both in terms of developments in the marketplace, letting people engage with one another. Commissioner Nesh used to do the debates, which I actually thought sometimes had a very compelling outcome as a way to fine-tune issues. What I don't think works, and I'll call out our friends at White Squared on this one, was the filing of the ex parte that comes out only after the order is released that has the memorialization of what the presentation was. Now that, to me, they comply with the ex parte rules, but there's a failure of leadership in how that got done. And I think I wouldn't regulate the ex parte process. I think people have to be held accountable for bad leadership decisions, and I think that was a bad leadership decision. That one was particularly egregious because it had an impact on AT&T and Verizon, which had no idea that was even in play at the time. And so there are abuses of the process, but I don't think they're an ex parte problem. I think they're a leadership decision-making problem.
I mean, the ex parte process isn't perfect, but it's a consequence of the system we have at the FCC. Right? My colleague, Ray Baum, who's Senior Policy Advisor to the Energy and Commerce Committee, is formerly the chairman of the Public Utility Commission in Oregon. And we've had this debate many times, because everything that happened at the PUC in Oregon is done on the record, public, with adverse parties present, and it was a more adjudicatory proceeding. As a consequence of the fact that that's just not how the FCC runs.
Right.
It's a much more public, participatory, frankly, free-for-all process where you're not debating the merits of a document that's already in existence. You're debating the creation of the document. The ex parte rules are a natural consequence of that. You have to have a way to inject some sunlight into that debate, and banning ex parte communications isn't going to cut it, and making everything an on the record in front of an ALJ would be a complete overhaul of the FCC and frankly would grind the place to a halt. So I don't love the ex parte process. Certainly there are ways to game it, but I think it's
It's moving so fast now, though, Bryan.
I mean, as the old line goes, right? It's the worst form of governance except all the others. I think it gets the job done based on how the FCC works.
All right, well, as long as you're, okay, Mary.
I think I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, technology is just moving too fast to expect that any bureaucrat sitting in an office can understand, the impacts of virtualization of networks or cloud or whatever. I mean, it's just moving too fast. The harder problem, though, I think, is the politicization of the ex parte process, right? That we saw in the open internet proceeding, where you end up with, I don't know, how many, hundreds of thousands, millions?
3 million.
Right.
I heard 10.
Right, I don't know what the number was, but they're form letters, and they represent the views of the American public, but they were not informed letters, right? They were, someone pushed a letter in front of you and said the FCC is going to do something bad that you won't like, send this letter. And how are we, this is the first time this has really happened, and how are we going to deal with that going forward?
It turns out Capitol Hill knows a little bit about being urged by clickbait. We get this all the time on Capitol Hill, frankly. If you've ever worked at a Capitol Hill personal office, you know the number of form letters you get in that you have to crank out a form letter response to. Frankly, you know, I'm equally troubled, Mary, by the fact that it seems as though we are counting with equal weight the folks who chime in with an informed economic and engineering opinion on the record with a 100-page filing, along with those who were willing to read an email and say, the FCC is going to take away the internet? Well, I would hate that. Yes, send this letter.
It's the weight of the evidence.
And so,
it's the way we stack those 10 million, it's the weight of the
But
evidence.
the problem is not that the letters get sent in, it's the problem is it the way to the evidence. It's not that there's no problem with getting the letters other than it increases the burden on policymakers to explain. And whether it's the prior record before this docket, by the way, was Janet Jackson's
yes,
board
that's
malfunctioning,
right.
which I was a lucky recipient.
How could we forget?
Yes, and equally well-informed emails. And,
George has it as a screensaver.
But the point is, you just can't let it. It should not guide policymaking. It is important. You should hear from your constituents. Somebody taking time to do that is what American democracy is built on. But it changes what you have an obligation to explain as a political leader.
Yeah, you want to know what people are thinking, but as an expert agency, the obligation is to take it all in and give it the weight it deserves.
Yeah.
Yes, but you now have a certain senior counselor to the chairman actually going out and encouraging more of this. I mean, and it got to the point where people actually accosted Tom Wheeler at his home. I mean, it's the level of discussion that's going on. I mean, the question is, is there a market for it? I don't know, but I mean,
That was the most uncomfortable video.
like I said, 15 years of this, and this is where we've all come, boys and girls. We've all been doing it. We've all known each other for so long. All right, well, let's move on. What about, budget cuts? Okay. There's a FCC commissioner down there. He's looking at us going, oh, Lord. All right, well, listen, good commissioners here. I want to thank you. This was an excellent, I can't top that panel.
Thank you for inviting me, Commissioner Potter. I appreciate it.
That was a truly excellent panel. I thank you all very, very, very much for that.